After 21 years handling their largest client, the VP said I was emotionally exhausted and moved me out. Remy, we need to discuss your future. My future? The pen slipped from my fingers. VP. Harrison Wells stood in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. Behind him lurked Derek Ashford, our newest senior manager, all ambition and Harvard MBA smugness. You seem emotionally exhausted, Harrison continued. 21 years managing Meridian, that's a lot of emotional investment. Meridian just renewed for another 3 years, I said slowly. $120 million contract, signed yesterday. Exactly why we need fresh energy. Derek stepped forward, tablet in hand. I've been analyzing the account metrics. There's potential for significant growth that emotional attachment might be limiting. Emotional attachment to a client relationship that had sustained Red Rock through 2 recessions, 3 leadership changes, and countless market shifts. To the partnership that paid for their bonuses, their company cars, their glass towers. We're moving you to business development, Harrison said. New accounts, fresh start. Derek will transition the Meridian relationship. The room tilted. 21 years of late-night calls, weekend emergencies, relationship building across decades. 21 years of knowing every decision-maker at Meridian, every pressure point, every hidden motivation. They specifically requested me for the renewal negotiations I managed, which shows how dependent they've become. Unhealthy codependency will charm them differently, more strategic, less personal. I've already scheduled my first meeting with their CFO, Derek continued. Next week. We'll discuss optimization opportunities you might have missed. After generating more revenue than any other account manager in company history. Pack up the Meridian files, Harrison said. Derek will need everything by Friday. My hands shook as I reached for the thick folders containing 21 years of institutional knowledge. Client histories, personal preferences, family details, business insights that couldn't be captured in any database. Any questions? Harrison's tone suggested there shouldn't be. None, I told. The drive home passed in fragments, traffic lights, familiar streets, the weight of finality settling over everything like dust. Martha was in the garden when I arrived, tending to roses that had grown wild during another season of my absence. You're early, she said, looking up from the soil. Then she saw my face. What happened? They moved me off Meridian. The words felt surreal even as I spoke them. 21 years of my life dismissed as emotional exhaustion. Martha set down her gardening gloves and came to sit beside me on the porch steps. Tell me, she said simply. Where to begin? With Robert, Meridian Sr., the company founder who'd taken a chance on a small consulting firm and a hungry young account manager? With the nights I'd spent at hospital bedsides when his wife was dying, holding his hand while he made impossible business decisions. Through grief? With his son Robert Jr., who'd inherited the company and the relationship. The fishing trips where real business got done between sunrise and noon, away from boardrooms and PowerPoint presentations. The trust built through 2 decades of keeping promises, solving problems, being present when presence mattered more than process. The Meridian account wasn't just business, it was legacy. I'd watched their company grow from $50 million to $500 million in revenue. I'd helped them navigate acquisitions, market downturns, technological shifts. When other vendors failed them, I was the one they called. When opportunities arose, I was the first to know. Martha squeezed my hand. You built that relationship from nothing. I had. The original contract was $37,000 for a 6-month consulting engagement. Basic market analysis for a regional manufacturing company with big dreams. I'd worked 16-hour days, delivered ahead of schedule, and earned their trust one deliverable at a time. The growth had been organic, natural. As Meridian expanded, they brought Red Rock along. New divisions meant new consulting needs. Acquisitions required integration expertise. Strategic planning demanded outside perspective. By year 5, we were their primary vendor. By year 10, we were family. But growth had costs. Family dinners missed for client emergencies. Vacations cut short for urgent projects. Weekends lost to relationship maintenance and business development. Martha had learned to set one place at the table, knowing I might not make it home. Was it worth it? She asked quietly. I thought about the revenue numbers. Over $800 million in cumulative billings. Contracts that had funded Red Rock's expansion, paid for their headquarters, supported hundreds of employees. The foundation of everything they'd built. It was my life's work, I said. Now that work belonged to Derek Ashford, a man who'd never met Robert Meridian Jr., who didn't know about the fishing trips or the hospital visits or the handshake agreements that held when contracts failed. A man who saw optimization opportunities where I saw relationships. That evening I sat in my home office, surrounded by 21 years of accumulated knowledge, client files, meeting notes, relationship maps that existed nowhere but in my memory. The human infrastructure of business success. Derek would get the contracts, the revenue projections, the organizational charts, but he wouldn't get the stories, the context. The understanding that business relationships aren't built on strategy, they're built on trust. I opened my laptop and began typing. Not a transition document, something else entirely. A comprehensive analysis of every financial vulnerability I'd observed in Red Rock's operations over 2 decades. Every inefficiency, every questionable practice, every corner cut in the name of quarterly profits. They thought I was emotionally exhausted. They had no idea how observant exhausted people could be. Business development turned out to be corporate, exile disguised as opportunity. A windowless office in the basement, a territory of cold leads and reluctant prospects. Assignments designed to keep me busy while the real business happened upstairs. But exile provided perspective. And privacy. My new role gave me access to financial systems I'd never needed before. Budgeting software, expense tracking, vendor management databases. 21 years of senior management trust meant my clearance levels remained unchanged. Nobody thought to restrict the emotionally exhausted veterans' access to sensitive information. I used the first month to map Red Rock's financial ecosystem. Not the public numbers. Those were sanitized for investors and regulators. The real numbers. Operating costs, profit margins, cash flow patterns, vendor relationships that existed in the shadows of official accounting. What I found was illuminating. Red Rock operated on razor-thin margins despite their premium positioning. The Meridian contract wasn't just their largest account, it was their financial lifeline. Remove that revenue, and the entire structure would collapse like a house of cards. Meanwhile, Derek was making his mark upstairs. I heard the updates through office gossip, carefully cultivated relationships with assistants and junior staff who appreciated my years of mentorship and guidance. Derek's pushing for service restructuring, mentioned Lisa from accounting during a hallway conversation. Wants to unbundle the Meridian services, charge separately for components that used to be included. Unbundling. The classic consultant's mistake, taking integrated solutions apart to maximize billing opportunities while destroying the value proposition that made them attractive in the first place. And Robert Jr.? Not happy, from what I hear. Derek's scheduled 3 restructuring meetings this month. Same proposals, different presentations. I smiled and moved on. But that evening, I made a phone call. Robert? It's Remy. How are you holding up? Robert Meridian Jr.'s voice was strained. Honestly, confused. This Derek fellow keeps wanting to change everything. Says the current structure is suboptimal. Change can be good, I said carefully. Fresh perspectives and all that. Maybe. But he doesn't seem to understand our business the way you did. Keeps talking about efficiency metrics and optimization frameworks. I just want results. After the call, I sat in my home office, staring at financial data that told a story Derek couldn't see. Red Rock's dependency on Meridian wasn't just about revenue. It was about timing, cash flow. The Meridian payments funded operations, met payroll, covered expenses across the entire organization. If that contract disappeared, Red Rock wouldn't just lose a client. They'd lose their ability to function. I began building something I called the Efficiency Initiative. Not sabotage, optimization. A systematic analysis of every financial process, every vendor relationship, every operational expense that could be streamlined. The beauty of financial phantom work is that it looks like legitimate business improvement. Cost reduction, process enhancement, eliminating waste and redundancy. Management loves that kind of initiative, especially when it comes from a trusted veteran with 21 years of institutional knowledge. But I knew something Derek didn't understand. In business, the line between optimization and destruction is often invisible until you've crossed it. I started small. Vendor audits that identified redundant service providers, expense reviews that questioned unnecessary operation. Each recommendation was carefully researched, professionally presented, and focused on immediate cost savings. The kind of quarterly thinking that looked brilliant on paper, but ignored long-term consequences. And slowly, systematically, I began documenting every financial weakness, every dependency, every point of failure in Red Rock's carefully constructed prosperity. When the Meridian contract inevitably collapsed under Derek's strategic brilliance, I wanted to ensure the damage would be swift, comprehensive, and irreversible. The first crack appeared in month 3 of Derek's tenure. Robert Meridian Jr. called me directly, bypassing official channels entirely. "Remy, I need your advice. Off the record." We met at Giuseppe's, the small Italian restaurant where Robert Sr. and I had hammered out the original deal 21 years ago. The same corner booth, the same wine, but everything else had changed. "Derek's latest proposal is aggressive," Robert said, sliding a folder across the table. "He wants to restructure our entire engagement model, separate billing for services. We've always bundled. Premium pricing for what he calls specialized consulting." I reviewed the proposal while Robert talked. It was exactly what I'd expected. A classical MBA approach that maximized short-term revenue while destroying long-term value. Derek had identified every service component and assigned it a price tag, turning our integrated partnership into a transaction-based marketplace. "The numbers don't work," Robert continued. "His restructuring would increase our annual cost by 40% while reducing service levels. I don't understand the logic." "What did you tell him?" "That we needed time to review." He said market rates justified the increases. That our current arrangement was below industry standards. Robert's frustration was evident. "Below standards? We've been partnering successfully for 2 decades. I handed back the proposal. "What are you thinking?" "Honestly, we're exploring alternatives." Quietly. "Derek's approach feels more like extortion than partnership." Alternatives. The word hung in the air like smoke. That evening I accelerated my financial phantom protocol. If Meridian was considering alternatives, Red Rock's financial vulnerability window was narrowing rapidly. I needed to create maximum systemic weakness before the inevitable collapse. I started with vendor consolidation. My efficiency initiative had identified dozens of redundant service providers across accounting, IT support, facilities management, and business operations. I recommended eliminating secondary vendors to streamline operations and reduce administrative overhead. The CFO loved it. Cutting vendor relationships meant immediate cost savings and simplified accounting, but it also meant eliminating backup options, redundancy, and competitive leverage. When primary vendors failed or raised prices, Red Rock would have no alternatives. Next came the expense audit. I identified every discretionary cost that could be eliminated or deferred. Training budgets, equipment reserves, maintenance contracts, insurance coverage that seemed excessive. Each cut improved quarterly numbers while increasing long-term risk. The masterpiece was my cash flow optimization plan. Red Rock's financial cycle depended on predictable client payments to meet operational expenses. The Meridian contract provided the largest, most reliable revenue stream, payments that funded payroll, rent, utilities, and vendor commitments across the entire organization. I recommended accelerating expense payments to capture early pay discounts, while extending client payment terms to improve working capital management. On paper, it looked like sophisticated financial engineering. In reality, it created a cash flow gap that could only be sustained by consistent, large-scale client payments, specifically Meridian payments. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Red Rock's optimized financial structure now required the Meridian contract to function. Without those payments, the company would face immediate liquidity problems, payroll shortfalls, vendor defaults, operational shutdowns. But Derek was making my job easier. His relationship with Meridian deteriorated weekly. Robert Jr. complained about arrogance, inflexibility, and fundamental misunderstanding of their business needs. Derek's response was to double down. More aggressive proposals, higher prices, take-it-or-leave-it ultimatums that destroyed 21 years of collaborative partnership. I monitored the situation through my network of relationships, carefully, maintained connections that provided real-time intelligence about both companies. When Robert Jr. began meeting with competitive consulting firms, I knew the endgame was approaching. The final component of my phantom protocol was the most insidious: internal audit chaos. I began documenting every questionable expense, every irregular payment, every accounting decision that could be interpreted as impropriety, not because anything was genuinely wrong, but because financial scrutiny could paralyze operations at precisely the wrong moment. Ghost invoices that seemed suspicious but were actually legitimate. Vendor payments that appeared excessive but reflected market rates. Expense allocations that looked questionable but followed standard practices. None of it was illegal, but all of it would require time, resources, and explanations to resolve. When the financial crisis hit, Red Rock would face simultaneous challenges: lost revenue, cash flow problems, vendor defaults, and internal investigations that would consume management attention and resources. Derek's phone calls to Robert Jr. became more frequent and more desperate. Concessions, modifications, apologies for misunderstood proposals. But trust, once broken, couldn't be rebuilt. With PowerPoint presentations and revised pricing models. I knew the exact moment Meridian made their decision. Robert Jr. didn't call me directly. That would have been inappropriate. Instead, I heard it from Lisa in accounting, who'd processed the contract termination notice. "Meridian's out," she whispered during a coffee break. 60 days notice. "They're moving to Steinberg Associates." Steinberg. I knew them well, a solid firm with excellent capabilities and competitive pricing. Everything Red Rock used to be before they decided emotional exhaustion was a liability. The termination notice triggered automatic financial reviews, cash flow projections, and emergency planning sessions. Within hours, Red Rock's executives realized the scope of their problem. The Meridian contract wasn't just revenue, it was survival, and they had 60 days to replace $120 million in annual billings. The phantom phase was complete. Now came the collapse. The panic started in the executive suite and spread like wildfire. I watched from my basement exile as Red Rock's leadership discovered what 21 years of relationship building actually meant. The Meridian contract wasn't just their largest account, it was 47% of total revenue, the foundation that supported everything else. Harrison Wells called emergency meetings. Derek presented desperate retention proposals. The sales team scrambled to identify replacement revenue that didn't exist. But Robert Meridian Jr. had made his decision, and Derek's arrogance had burned bridges that couldn't be rebuilt. My efficiency initiatives began taking effect with surgical precision. The vendor consolidation hit first. Primary IT support systems failed during a critical client presentation, but the backup providers I'd eliminated were no longer available. Equipment breakdowns couldn't be quickly resolved because maintenance contracts had been optimized away. Office supplies ran short because redundant suppliers had been cut to reduce administrative overhead. Each individual failure was minor, manageable. Combined, they created operational chaos that made Red Rock look incompetent to remaining clients. The cash flow crisis followed predictably. My optimization plan had accelerated expense payments while extending client payment cycles, creating a gap that Meridian payments had previously filled. With that revenue gone, Red Rock faced immediate liquidity problems. Payroll was the first casualty. Not because money didn't exist, but because cash flow timing had been optimized to depend on predictable large payments. Employees received delayed paychecks with apologetic emails about temporary accounting adjustments. Then came the vendor defaults. Service providers who hadn't been paid demanded immediate settlement or contract termination. The reduced vendor pool meant no alternatives, no competitive leverage, no graceful solutions. Critical services simply stopped. But the killing blow was the audit chaos I'd carefully orchestrated. The CFO, trying to understand the sudden financial crisis, ordered comprehensive reviews of all accounts, expenses, and vendor relationships. My documented irregularities triggered investigations that consumed management time and attention at precisely the wrong moment. Ghost invoices required explanation. Suspicious payments demanded documentation. Questionable allocations needed justification. None of it was actually problematic, but investigating consumed resources and distracted leadership from the real crisis. Meanwhile, Derek's desperation reached pathetic levels. He called Robert Jr. daily, offering concessions, reduced rates, modified service levels, anything to salvage the relationship. But 21 years of trust couldn't be rebuilt in 60 days, especially not by the man who destroyed it. The industry took notice quickly. News of Meridian's departure spread through consulting circles like gossip. Other clients began questioning Red Rock's stability, postponing decisions, exploring alternatives. The reputation I'd spent 2 decades building crumbled in weeks. Stock price plummeted. Board meetings became crisis sessions. Emergency loans were negotiated at predatory rates. Key employees jumped to competitors, taking institutional knowledge and client relationships with them. Harrison Wells held a desperate, all-hands meeting, promising that the Meridian situation was temporary and that new opportunities were developing. But everyone could see the fear in his eyes, hear the uncertainty in his voice. Derek became the scapegoat, blamed for relationship mismanagement and strategic incompetence. But removing him wouldn't solve the fundamental problem. Red Rock had structured itself around revenue that no longer existed. The phantom collapse was beautiful in its inevitability. No single cause, no obvious sabotage, just the natural consequence of replacing relationship-based business with transaction-focused extraction. Derek had optimized their largest client relationship to death, and my efficiency initiatives had eliminated the redundancy and resilience needed to survive the loss. Within 90 days of my emotional exhaustion diagnosis, Red Rock was hemorrhaging money, losing clients, and facing operational collapse. The company that had dismissed 21 years of relationship expertise was learning exactly what that expertise was worth. I submitted my resignation on a Tuesday morning, exactly 4 months after being moved to business development. The letter was brief, professional, and devastating in its timing. One more competent employee abandoning a sinking ship. Martha found me in the garden that evening, tending to roses that had grown wild during another season of corporate dedication. "How do you feel?" she asked. I looked up from the soil, considering the question. Emotionally refreshed. The call came 6 months after Red Rock's final collapse, while I was reviewing proposals for my new consulting practice. The irony wasn't lost on me. My emotional exhaustion had been cured by watching the systematic destruction of everything I'd built. "Remy, this is Robert Meridian Jr." I recognized the voice immediately, though it sounded different now. Confident, satisfied, vindicated. "Robert, how are you adjusting to Steinberg Associates?" "Actually, that's why I'm calling. We've been working with them for 6 months, and while they're competent, something's missing. The partnership doesn't feel the same." I said nothing, letting him fill the silence. "Look, I know what happened at Red Rock. The whole industry knows Derek's approach, the financial collapse, the way they treated you." He paused. "I want to make you an offer." The proposal was elegant in its simplicity. Meridian would establish an internal consulting division with me as founding director. Full autonomy, competitive compensation, equity participation in the projects we developed. Not just a job, a partnership. You'd have complete authority to build the team, set the processes, establish the culture, everything Red Rock should have been but wasn't. I accepted immediately. Building the new division took a year, but the foundation was solid. Former Red Rock employees who jumped ship during the collapse became the core team. Colleagues who understood that business relationships weren't transactions but investments, partnerships built on trust rather than extraction. Martha noticed the change in me during those months. The bitterness had faded, replaced by something more constructive. Purpose. I wasn't just managing accounts anymore. I was teaching the industry how relationship-based business should work. The consulting division became profitable within 18 months, generating revenue that exceeded the old Red Rock contract while providing better service at lower cost. Industry publications wrote case studies about our integrated partnership model and relationship-centric approach. But the sweetest vindication came 2 years later, when Harrison Wells called me directly. "Remy, I know we didn't part on the best terms, but I wanted you to know. You were right about the Meridian relationship, about Derek's approach, about everything." Red Rock had been acquired by a larger firm for 20 cents on the dollar, its assets stripped and sold, its reputation permanently damaged. Harrison was calling from a small regional consultancy, trying to rebuild his career after the spectacular failure of his strategic vision. "I should have listened," he continued. "Should have understood what you'd built with them." "You called it emotional exhaustion," I reminded him. I was wrong. It wasn't exhaustion. It was investment. 21 years of investment that I threw away for quarterly thinking. I thanked him for the call and hung up, but his words stayed with me, a recognition that came too late to matter but still felt like justice. 3 years after Red Rock's collapse, I stood in my new office overlooking downtown, reviewing quarterly results that exceeded every projection. The Meridian Internal Consulting Division had grown to 40 employees, serving not just their needs but providing services to their entire industry network. On my desk, I kept 2 items as reminders. The first was the original Red Rock contract from 21 years ago, $37,000 for 6 months of market analysis. The second was Derek's business card, found in my old files, with his confident smile and strategic growth specialist title. Some called it revenge. I called it natural selection. The business world had evolved past transaction-based extraction, embracing partnership-based collaboration. Companies that understood relationships thrived. Those that didn't simply cease to exist. Martha was right to ask how I felt. But satisfaction wasn't the right word anymore. Vindication was more accurate. The industry had learned finally that business relationships weren't about charm or strategy or optimization. They were about trust, built slowly and maintained carefully, one conversation at a time. Derek had promised to charm Meridian differently. He had. He'd charmed them right into a competitor's arms, taking $120 million and 21 years of partnership with them. The charm had indeed worn off.